Marvel Cinematic Universe is all set to bring a slew of new live-action superheroes and villains in Phase 4 to lay the roadmap to its future. And they've got none other than the likes of Angelina Jolie, Kit Harington, Selma Hayek, Kumail Nanjiani, and Richard Madden to up the cinematic ante. You might have guessed that I'm talking about the upcoming Eternals movie, which will introduce a new race of mysterious heroes created by the legendary Jack Kirby to the MCU. After a brief switch to DC during which he made the Fourth World and the New Gods, Jack Kirby returned to Marvel and invented the Eternals. In the comic books, the Eternals are a race of subhumans created by the Celestials as part of their experiments on early mankind. The experiments also ended up creating an unwanted genetic offshoot of creatures who became known as the Deviants. The Deviants have been the titular antagonists of the Eternals and are largely considered in comic book history as a threat to humanity. The Eternals lived in obscurity on Earth for centuries until an accident involving cosmic energies destroyed their city and rendered them immortal. Since they evolved as a powerful branch of sentient life on Earth, the Eternals traditionally took up the roles of protecting mankind. The movie will follow on these lines and pitch them against the Deviants, but there are several changes to be seen in the cinematic retelling of this narrative. The Eternals were created close on the heels of Jack Kirby's exit from DC and shared similarities with DC's New Gods, so the two cosmic families have been compared to each other. While the Eternals movie will hit theaters in 2021, a DCEU film centered around the New Gods has also been long in the making. So let's see what the Eternals are all about and how they're expected to fit into the MCU going forward. When the mythical Celestials arrived on Earth thousands of years ago, they ended up tampering with its evolutionary process. Their experiments on the early variety of humanity, or the proto-humans, created two iterations of humanoids. The good version had exceptionally long lives, while the not-so-good offshoot was a bizarre and genetically unstable race dubbed as the Deviants. The Eternals were long-lived but didn't become fully immortal until their leader Kronos accidentally unleashed a surge of cosmic energy in their city, Titanos. The blowout destroyed him and permanently altered the biology of his clan, giving them infinite lives and incredible powers. This forms the comic book background of the Eternals, and the movie adaptation will see these heroes emerge from the shadows due to the life-altering events of Avengers Endgame. While the movie is expected to be more or less aligned with the comic book storyline, the MCU is already making changes to its on-screen Eternals. We know that Selma Hayek has been cast as a gender-swapped version of Ajak. Ajak will also be seen as the leader of the Eternals in the movie as opposed to Zurus, who has traditionally been associated with that role. That's not all. Marvel has also been curiously tight-lipped about how it will portray the Deviants. The comics have established them as mankind's enemies, but it's likely that the MCU will attempt to recalibrate this perception and give their narrative a new spin. This would not be far from what Marvel did with the Elementals in Spider-Man Far From Home and the Skrulls in Captain Marvel. Regardless of how it plays out, the Deviants will certainly be central to the conflict in the film. Whatever they may or may not have been up to will result in a quote-unquote unexpected tragedy, leading to a confrontation between the Eternals and Deviants. The movie also has the potential to circle back to Thanos' comic book origins as the son of eternal parents who carries a deviant gene. The Eternals could usher in a wealth of new information about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as their connection to humanity almost goes back to its inception. There are four broad groups of the celestial descendants, namely the Olympian, Polar, Uranian, and Titanian Eternals. The early civilization of the Eternals was based on the city of Titanos, with Kronos as the supreme leader and chief scientist. After his fatal experiment with cosmic energy destroyed Titanos, the Eternals disseminated into different branches. Kronos' son, Zurus, took over as the leader and founded a new city called Olympia in Greece. Olympia became the foundation of the Eternal saga in many ways, and many comic book tales feature stories of Zurus and his lineage. The movie will introduce many key Olympian Eternals like Athena, Circe, Sprite, Gilgamesh, Phastos, and Makari to the MCU. Kronos may have been the leader of the Eternals, but that doesn't mean his reign was unopposed. The Eternals were embroiled in a civil war before Titanos perished, with Kronos and his brother Uranos on opposing sides. Uranos lost the war and retracted to Uranus with his followers. They also made a copy of Saturn's moon, which was snuffed out while the Uranian colony prevailed. Uranos was at odds with his brother, and their differences were too dire to be resolved, which is a good conflict for the MCU to explore. After Kronos died, some Eternals were unhappy with Zurus replacing him as their leader. They were vouching for his other son Alars to take his father's mantle. Unhappy with the circumstances, they left with Alars to rebuild a spacebound colony on Titan. Alars then re-established the Titanian leg of the Eternals and developed romantic relations with a Uranian survivor to father Thanos and Eros. Thanos has already made a famous cinematic entry, but the MCU has not confirmed its version of the Mad Titan as an Eternal, so it's quite likely that the movie will have a cameo of the bad guy to establish that connection. Other than the Olympian, Uranian, and Titanian Eternals, there also exists a fringe group of the Celestial offspring in Siberia. These polar Eternals were first led by the remarkably powerful Viraco. After his death, his brother Vulcan became the incumbent leader. The modern-day polar Eternals have made their way into Russia and are not respected like their Olympian cousins. Despite this, exceptions like Icarus and Ajax have been portrayed as heroic characters and will have key roles in the upcoming movie. All of this builds a lot of excitement about what the Eternals will bring to the table story and character-wise. They're literally an entire race of superheroes that has not exposed themselves to the human world. While heroes like the Avengers have shared clear ties with humans, the same hasn't been true for the Eternals. They weren't around for the whole duration of Endgame, despite having powers that would have quickly overwhelmed Thanos. The comic book did lay out rules dictating non-interference on the part of the Eternals, but the movie should establish its own reason for why they don't seem to meddle with human affairs. Apart from that, it will also bring out a range of unique characters to look out for. What's notable is that, due to their cosmic makeup, each Eternal has more powers on their person than the genetic superhero. All Eternals are capable of teleportation, telepathy, telekinesis, levitation, creating illusions, and shooting cosmic rays from their hands and eyes. They also have the ability to harness molecules, which allows them to regenerate their bodies at will. As if that's not enough, the Eternals can channelize their cosmic energies to uniquely enhance some of their powers. This would explain why some of them are able to become more powerful than the rest. Kingo, for instance, is an expert swordsman in the comic books. The movie version has done away with Japanese roots to make him a Bollywood star played by Kumail Nanjiani instead. Richard Madden will play Icarus, who is the second strongest Eternal on Earth according to the comics. Icarus will be outranked in strength by Gilgamesh, and Don Lee is all set to take up the incredible role. Angelina Jolie will be stepping in to play the firebrand warrior Thena, and Gemma Chan Cersei will potentially outshine everyone on screen with her capacity to transform any being into whatever she pleases. I'm going bonkers imagining how easily she could have annihilated Thanos by transforming him into just about anything without hands. Druig and Sprite will also have notable matter manipulation powers, but not in the same plane as Cersei's capabilities. Last but not by any means the least, Ajax will have the unique ability to communicate with the Celestials. This could be the reason for her being elected the leader of the Eternals in the MCU. We already mentioned that Ajax will be gender swapped in the film, but the Eternals will also notably see Lauren Ridloff play the traditionally male character of Makkari. Despite the lack of information on the Deviants, this new slate of heroes and their exceptional powers indicate that the stakes in the cinematic universe could not be higher. This means that Phase 4 will promise an equally impressive palette of villains, each more ominous than the last. The Eternals form a significant piece of comic book history. They signaled Jack Kirby's arrival at the creative frontier that was long overdue after facing consistent underappreciation at Marvel and DC Comics. But they didn't enjoy enough pull with the comic book audiences to last longer than a few years back in the 70s. So, choosing the Eternals to pave the way for the future of the MCU does seem kind of odd. But Marvel has time and again picked out seemingly strange comic book storylines and turned them into chart-busting movie adaptations. The Guardians films stand as proof that forgettable canon can catapult to fame in the cinematic universe, and the same could happen with the Eternals. Director Chloe Zhao will lead the project, and after a delay due to the pandemic, it is all set to hit theaters in February 2021. Zhao's last creative venture was the widely appreciated Western drama called The Rider, which she wrote, directed, and co-produced. The Eternals squarely places Zhao in Marvel's niche of cosmic forces, mythology, and science fiction. Marvel has already tiptoed out of the cinematic realm with WandaVision, Loki, and Hawkeye. The Eternals may not necessarily find themselves on television yet, but the sprawling portfolio of characters and narratives that they bring into the MCU could help it to expand in that direction. To sum it up, the Eternals are well positioned to make connections in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that haven't been explored. With Captain Marvel, the MCU laid the groundwork for tracing the roots of the Kree and Skrull races and their long-standing conflict. It brought the rich legacy of the Wakandans into focus with Black Panther, and is poised to unravel yet another lineage now with the Eternals. All the conflicts that these films introduce will not overlap, and there is certainly room for independent plotlines in there, but Phase 4 should put at least a few noteworthy pins in the MCU timeline. Well, thanks for watching this video. We hope that answered some of your questions about the Eternals franchise. What do you think about these upcoming heroes?